Vladimir Putin just lost his last land bridge to Transnistria, and the small country that severed it, a nation of just 33,000 square kilometers squeezed between Romania and Ukraine, has become the most consequential geopolitical development in Eastern Europe since Finland joined NATO. Moldova is formally withdrawing from the Russia-led Commonwealth of independent states, and tonight, Putin is watching his entire post-Soviet strategic architecture collapse from the south. The conflict driving tonight's crisis is direct. Russia versus the West. But the battlefield is not Ukraine, it is Moldova. And the weapon being used is not missiles or tanks, it is sovereignty. One small nation choosing its future and in doing so dismantling decades of carefully constructed Russian influence with a single parliamentary vote, and the consequences of that vote will reshape the security architecture of an entire continent for decades to come. Here is what we know with certainty. On March 12, Moldova's cabinet of ministers approved the termination of the 1991 Minsk Founding Agreement, its protocol, and the 1993 CIS Charter. Parliament Speaker Grosu set the timeline clearly. We can complete this by Easter. This is not a diplomatic formality. This is not a symbolic gesture. This is the driving of one of the final nails into the coffin of Russia's claim to dominance in the post-Soviet space. And for Putin, it is a nightmare unfolding in slow motion that he cannot stop. To understand why this moment is so significant, you need to understand what Moldova actually is and where it sits on the map. Romania to the west, Ukraine to the east, a tiny country squeezed between two massive neighbors. Throughout history, this land has been a battleground for great powers. And tonight it is a battleground again, but this time the weapons are diplomacy, sovereignty, and strategic alignment rather than guns and bombs. Historically, Moldova was part of Romania. The two countries speak the same language. What is called Moldovan is linguistically a dialect of Romanian. They share the same cultural roots, the same Orthodox tradition, and even the same melody for their national anthem. From 1918 to 1940, Moldova, known then as Bessarabia, was part of Greater Romania. Then the Soviet Union annexed it in 1940. They imposed the Cyrillic alphabet. They implemented a systematic policy of Russification. They sought to sever Moldova from Romania and construct a separate Moldovan national identity. The goal was to permanently erase the connection between two peoples who were historically one. The Soviet strategy was simple and brutal. Divide the same people into two, alienate them from one another, and control them both. That strategy worked for decades, and now it is collapsing in real time. The identity that Moscow spent 50 years trying to manufacture is dissolving in the face of a population that has decided, clearly and democratically, that its future lies in Europe and not in Moscow. For more than 30 years after independence, Moldova swung like a pendulum, sometimes toward Moscow, sometimes toward the West. Then Sandu won the presidency in 2020 and the pendulum swung permanently. Sandu is a former World Bank economist with a pro-European vision who has openly condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine and accused the Kremlin of attempting to overthrow her government. Under her leadership, Moldova received EU candidate status in 2022. Accession negotiations are ongoing. The last official institutional link to Moscow is now being severed, and the speed at which this is happening has caught even Western analysts off guard. But here is what makes tonight's development truly alarming for the Kremlin. Moldova is not turning toward Ukraine, it is turning toward Romania. And Romania is a NATO member. Not just any NATO member. Romania hosts F-16 training facilities, the Aegis coastal defense system, and the Mikhail Kogalnyshin new airbase, one of the largest NATO bases in Europe. It is the most critical NATO stronghold on the western coast of the Black Sea. Moldova coming under Romania's umbrella means NATO can completely paralyze Russia's southern flank without firing a single shot, without deploying a single additional soldier, simply by allowing geography and sovereignty to take their natural course. President Sandu made her position unmistakably clear in a radio interview last week. She stated that if a referendum on unification with Romania were held today, she would vote yes. Think about what that means strategically. The president of a country that Russia has spent 30 years trying to keep within its sphere of influence has just publicly announced she would vote to merge her country with a NATO member state. That is not a diplomatic signal. That is a declaration of strategic direction that Moscow cannot ignore and cannot reverse. Now let me show you what is happening simultaneously on the military dimension. Because while Moldova votes to leave the CIS, a far more concrete development took place right next door. On the same day Moldova's cabinet approved its CIS withdrawal, Ukrainian President Zelensky traveled to Bucharest and signed a historic agreement with Romanian President Nicolae Dan, the joint production in Romania of advanced drone and anti-drone systems that Ukraine has field-tested across 4 years of the most intense drone warfare in history. The facilities will be established on Romanian soil. They will receive support from the EU's Defense Fund, and they will be integrated into a comprehensive Black Sea defense architecture that directly threatens Russia's remaining naval assets in the region. Think about what this means in operational terms. Romania had already experienced Russian drone incursions along its 650-kilometer Danube River border with Ukraine. Russian drones repeatedly violated Romanian airspace during attacks on Ukrainian ports. Now these two countries are building a drone wall along the Black Sea front, a defense line backed by NATO infrastructure, powered by 4 years of Ukrainian battlefield experience, and scaled by Romanian industrial production capacity. The remnants of Russia's Black Sea fleet, already severely degraded by Ukrainian strikes, will now operate permanently under the shadow of this wall, and there is nothing Moscow can do to dismantle it without triggering a direct confrontation with the entire NATO alliance. But Zelensky did not stop at the drone agreement. On the same day in Bucharest, he signed a decree declaring that August 31st would be officially celebrated as Romanian Language Day in Ukraine every year. Romania reciprocated by celebrating November 9th as Ukrainian Language Day. This may appear to be a gesture of cultural goodwill. Geopolitically, it is a checkmate move. Russia's most powerful propaganda weapon in Eastern Europe for decades has been the minority rights card. Moscow intervenes under the pretext of protecting Russian-speaking minorities in neighboring countries. It did this in Georgia. It did this in Ukraine. It is attempting to do it in Moldova with a single signature. Zelensky removed that card from the Kremlin's hand. He neutralized minority tensions between Romania and Ukraine and transformed historical mistrust between two nations into a military alliance. One signature, one decree, and one of Moscow's most powerful destabilization tools was rendered permanently ineffective. Now let me show you the most critical element of this entire geopolitical chess match. Transnistria, a separatist region stretching as a narrow strip along the eastern bank of the Dniester River within Moldovan territory. Since 1992, it has been a Russia-backed frozen conflict zone. Approximately 1,500 Russian troops are stationed there, officially designated as peacekeepers, but in reality serving as the guardians of massive Soviet-era weapons depots. That weapons depot is not a minor detail. Analysts estimate that if it were to explode, it would produce one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in history. Russia uses Transnistria as a calibrated control mechanism. As long as there is an unresolved conflict and a foreign military presence on Moldovan territory, EU accession negotiations become complicated and the path to NATO remains obstructed. Transnistria has been Russia's anchor, preventing Moldova from fully entering the Western orbit for 3 decades. And now the walls of that anchor point are collapsing from every direction simultaneously. By withdrawing from the CIS, Moldova has neutralized Russia's diplomatic pressure tools. In 2022, Ukraine destroyed the railway bridge on the Transnistrian border, physically blocking any passage of Russian soldiers into Ukrainian territory. Moldovan airspace is under Chisinau's control and Russia has no capacity to resupply by air. The Moldovan government explicitly defines the Russian presence in Transnistria as an occupying force. It is stripping Moldovan citizens serving in Transnistrian forces of their citizenship. President Sandu stated publicly that Russia was the aggressor in the 1992 war and added that today Russia is the aggressor in Ukraine as well. The Romania-Ukraine drone barrier and military alliance have completed the encirclement. Transnistria is now surrounded on all 4 sides, Moldova and Romania, meaning NATO, to the west, Ukraine to the east. No viable exit to the north or south. Logistical lines have been severed. Supply routes are blocked. 1,500 Russian soldiers are effectively isolated without reliable fuel supply, ammunition resupply, or the possibility of rotation. They are frozen in place while the geopolitical ground shifts permanently beneath their feet. Moldova's deputy prime minister officially announced that a plan for Transnistria's reintegration has been prepared in collaboration with Western partners, to be achieved exclusively through peaceful means. The plan outlines gradual stages including complete demilitarization, international administration, and the transfer of authority to Moldova's central government through economic reintegration and unified financial and customs regulations. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas stated clearly that the withdrawal of Russian troops from Moldova and other parts of Europe is essential for long-term stability. That statement is not a suggestion. It is a strategic demand backed by the full weight of the European Union. Now let me pull back and show you the full picture. Because what is happening is not just Moldova's withdrawal from the CIS. What is happening is the systematic unraveling of Russia's entire hegemonic structure across the post-Soviet geography. When the CIS was established in 1991, it had 12 members. Georgia withdrew after the 2008 war. Russia invaded Georgia and Georgia left. Ukraine withdrew de facto after the 2014 annexation of Crimea and officially in 2018, now Moldova. The same pattern repeats every time. Russia uses military force, the target country drifts away from Moscow, the CIS shrinks, and the organization that was supposed to anchor Russian influence becomes an increasingly hollow shell. Of the 283 agreements Moldova signed under the CIS framework, 71 have already been terminated and 60 more are in the process of being terminated. While 67% of Moldova's exports now go to the EU, only 6.8% go to CIS countries. The economic dependence that once bound Moldova to Moscow has completely reversed. Withdrawing from the CIS will save Moldova approximately $180,000 annually, a small figure in absolute terms. But its symbolic significance is immense. Moldova no longer pays dues to Moscow. Russia's foreign ministry reacted with warnings. Pro-Russian opposition leaders called it unacceptable. None of it changed anything. Moldova's train has left the station and it is not coming back. Consider what this means in the broader strategic context. When Putin launched the invasion of Ukraine, his stated goal was to prevent NATO from approaching Russia's borders. The result he actually achieved was the precise opposite. In the north, Sweden and Finland abandoned decades of neutrality and joined NATO. A new 1,300-kilometer NATO line formed along Russia's northwestern border. Finland's membership placed Russia's second-largest city, St. Petersburg, within 170 kilometers of NATO's reach. Putin's push NATO away doctrine collapsed completely in the north, and now the same dynamic is playing out in the south. Look at the map. A continuous line of NATO and NATO-aligned nations is forming along Russia's entire western border. From north to south, Finland, Sweden, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, and now Moldova entering under Romania's umbrella. Putin wanted a buffer zone. He created a NATO frontier stretching from the Arctic to the Black Sea. He wanted distance between Russia and the Western Alliance. He produced the longest continuous NATO-adjacent border in the organization's history. Every aggressive move he made accelerated the very outcome he was trying to prevent. The CIS Secretary-General is still Russian, but the organization he leads is becoming an increasingly hollow shell. Turkmenistan had already downgraded its status to observer in 2005. Azerbaijan and Armenia fought each other and Russia could not protect its ally Armenia. Armenia is now turning toward the west, the Central Asian republics quietly drawing closer to China and Turkey. If everyone is leaving the club you lead, being president is nothing more than a title. For the ordinary Moldovan family watching these developments, the shift is already being felt in concrete and personal ways. European investment is flowing and infrastructure projects funded by EU accession programs are underway across the country. Young Moldovans who once emigrated to Russia for economic opportunity are now building their futures in Romania, Germany, and France. The demographic and economic direction of the country has reversed as completely as its political direction. Russia's influence in Moldova is not just shrinking politically, it is evaporating across every dimension of national life simultaneously, and that evaporation is now irreversible. What we know tonight is this: Moldova is formally exiting the Russian sphere of influence. Transnistria is surrounded, isolated, and strategically irrelevant. The Romania-Ukraine military alliance is operational and expanding. NATO's southern flank is consolidating in ways that directly threaten Russia's Black Sea strategy. And Putin, the man who launched a war to push NATO away from its borders, is watching NATO's reach extend to his doorstep from both north and south simultaneously. While Putin tries to convince the world of a new multipolar order, he is being forced to watch as the walls in his own backyard crumble one by one. This journey that began with Soviet dreams of post-Soviet hegemony has ended in strategic failure. And the bitterest irony of all is that Putin himself pulled the trigger. Every aggressive move he made, every invasion he launched, every hybrid operation he executed, accelerated the very outcome he was trying to prevent. NATO did not expand toward Russia. Putin pushed the entire former Soviet world toward NATO. And tonight, Moldova is the latest and perhaps most painful proof that his strategy has failed completely. The referendum question on Moldovan unification with Romania will move from theoretical to real in the coming months. Transnistria's reintegration process will accelerate, and the NATO line from Finland to the Black Sea will solidify into something permanent and irreversible. The clock is running, the walls are falling, and there is nothing left in Moscow's toolkit that can reverse what is already in motion. Sonnet 4.6